The needle falls on an old vinyl record, and suddenly the room fills with the warm crackle of a sound you can feel before you recognize it. Forever Mine, Cry Together, Love Train, songs that carried entire generations through joy, heartbreak, and everything in between. They weren't just hits. They were the soundtrack of living rooms, road trips, barbershops, and Sunday mornings across America. But behind those harmonies, behind the spotlight shining on the OJs, stood a voice many listeners remember, but few truly knew. A soft-spoken tenor with eyes full of ambition and a life that moved faster than the fame he helped build, William Powell. Picture him under the stage lights, suit pressed sharp, smile easy, his high notes lifting the whole room like a wave. He was the kind of singer who didn't chase attention, it found him anyway. And yet, his name slowly faded from the stories people tell. So here's a question worth sitting with. How does a man who helped define an era slip quietly into the shadows of music history? Tonight, we walk back into his world, the dream, the rise, and the silent fall of William Powell. The story of William Powell begins in Canton, Ohio, a town where winters were long, churches were full, and music was often the only thing that warmed the walls of a working-class home. Powell grew up like many singers of his era, shaped by wooden pews, choir lofts, and the kind of Sunday mornings where voices rose from the floorboards like a prayer carried upward. In that world, he found not just music, but belonging. And long before stages and bright lights, he understood that singing could lift a boy higher than circumstance ever could. In high school, fate arranged a quiet miracle. Powell crossed paths with two classmates who shared the same hunger for harmony, Eddie Levert and Walter Williams. They were just teenagers, but their dreams were bigger than the town they lived in. One night, after watching Frankie Lymon and the teenagers electrify a local audience, the three boys knew exactly what they wanted to do. They didn't have money, connections, or polished instruments, just their voices, and a belief that those voices could take them somewhere else. They named their first group the Triumphs, a title far more ambitious than their surroundings. 5 young men, singing on porches, in school halls, and anywhere someone would listen. Eddie had the powerhouse voice. Walter had the smooth, steady tone. And Powell, with his crystalline tenor, could float above them like sunlight breaking through clouds. The balance was rare. The chemistry was natural. Even then, people paused when they heard them. Music often finds its path through unexpected doors, and for the boys, that door opened when record man Syd Nathan heard their sound. He wasn't looking for perfection, he was listening for potential. And he believed they had it. Nathan signed them to King Records, James Brown's label, and changed their name to the Mascots. It was their first real taste of the industry. They recorded 4 singles, each one carrying hope inside the grooves. But hope alone couldn't push the songs up the charts, and the records quietly slipped under the radar. Still, every stalled beginning leaves room for another first chance. That chance arrived in the form of a Cleveland DJ known as Eddie OJ, a man with an ear for voices that deserved a spotlight. He loved their music, not the numbers, not the sales, but the sound. And sometimes, that's all a young group needs, one person who hears something the world hasn't recognized yet. Eddie OJ became their manager and, in a way, their defender. To honor them, he gave them his own name. They became the OJs. Under his guidance, the group began playing bigger shows, learning how to command a stage the way seasoned performers did. They were invited to collaborate with Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, a moment that told them they were getting closer to the door they had been knocking on for years. Eddie O.J. reached out to Berry Gordy at Motown, hoping to land the group a deal, but Motown was overflowing with talent at the time. Instead, Gordy connected them with another key figure, A.G.B. Barnum in Los Angeles. Los Angeles was a different world. The air was warmer, the nights were brighter, and opportunity seemed to hang over every street. The OJs performed relentlessly, recorded new singles like Lonely Drifter and Lipstick Traces, and even sang background vocals for Nat King Cole. Imagine Powell, still barely out of his teens, standing behind one of the greatest voices of the century. It should have been the moment that changed everything. But the industry can be unpredictable, and once again, the success they hoped for didn't come. Dreams don't disappear easily, though. When Los Angeles didn't open the right doors, the group went back home to Ohio to regroup. And strangely, returning home became the turning point. Performing at the Apollo Theater, they crossed paths with the Intruders, who were signed to the rising songwriting team Gamble and Huff. The Intruders liked what they heard, and they knew someone else who would too. Gamble and Huff listened. And this time, the sound stuck. The OJs signed with Neptune Records, the label run by Gamble and Huff and distributed through Chess Records. Their single, One Night Affair, earned attention, enough to feel like the ground beneath them was finally shifting. But when Leonard Chess died suddenly, Neptune collapsed, scattering every artist on the label, including the OJs. It was a blow that would have ended most groups. But not this one. Not Powell, Eddie, and Walter. They held on, to their partnership, to their dreams, and to one another. Because by now, they weren't just three singers. They were brothers built from the same struggle. And just beyond the darkest stretch of the road, the breakthrough they had waited a decade for was finally waiting. The early 1970s arrived like a door swinging open, and for the first time, the OJs stepped through it with the wind at their backs. The group had survived label collapses, broken contracts, and years of chasing opportunity across the country. But nothing shaped them more than the moment they became a trio, Eddie Levert, Walter Williams, and William Powell standing shoulder to shoulder, voices blending tighter than ever before. Sometimes, losing people can break a group. But in their case, the loss sharpened the sound. It made space for Powell's tenor to shine like a new instrument the world hadn't noticed yet. Even when Motown came knocking with a brand new label under the Holland-Dozier Holland team, the trio stayed loyal to Gamble and Huff. Loyalty meant something then, especially among black artists who understood what it felt like to be overlooked, underpaid, and misunderstood. The choice to stay wasn't strategic. It was personal. They believed in Gamble and Huff's vision, and Gamble and Huff believed in theirs. Soon after, that faith was rewarded. Philadelphia International Records was born, not just a label, but a sound. Smooth strings, bold horns, deep grooves, and lyrics that cut straight through the noise of the decade. Eddie and Walter delivered the fire and the smoke. But Powell, he brought the air you breathed between the notes. In August 1972, everything changed. The album Backstabbers hit the shelves, wrapped in the Philly soul polish that would soon define a generation. But inside the studio, the story started differently. The title track, Backstabbers, wasn't a song they immediately loved. In fact, the group pushed back. It felt unusual, maybe too sharp, maybe too different. But Gamble and Huff insisted, hearing a hit the group couldn't hear yet. When the record dropped, the world answered for them. The song shot to number 1 on the Soul chart and reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. The groove was irresistible, dark, silky, rhythmic. Powell's tenor was the secret thread woven throughout the harmony, tightening the tension with every word. The O'Jays were no longer just a hard-working trio from Canton. They were a national voice. But the true breakthrough wasn't Backstabbers. It was the locomotive of hope that followed, Love Train. Love Train didn't just top the R&B charts, it hit number 1 on the Billboard Pop chart, their first and only song to do so. Imagine Powell singing those bright harmonies, the rhythm lifting the room like hands raised in celebration. The song became an anthem, crossing racial lines during a time when the country desperately needed connection. Black, white, old, young, people danced to the same beat, even if just for 3 minutes. With success came momentum. The Backstabbers album went platinum, sending the trio to stages bigger than anything they'd imagined. Crowds filled arenas, church suits turned into tailored stage wear, and the spotlight pulled them deeper into the world of fame. Women chased them backstage, calling Powell's name with a kind of devotion only the 1970s could produce. Eddie had the powerhouse grit. Walter had the velvet. But Powell, he had the high notes that felt like a heart opening. The pretty boy of the group, charming without trying, the one whose smile lingered long after he left the stage. Just 1 year later, in 1973, lightning struck again. They released Ship Ahoy, another masterpiece layered with social commentary, lush orchestration, and the unmistakable Philly soul heartbeat. The song, For the Love of Money, became an instant classic, its bassline unforgettable, its message timeless, its edge sharper than most soul records dared to be. Powell's floating harmonies carried the chorus with a tension that matched the lyrics, money lifting some people up, destroying others along the way. The album went platinum. The tours expanded. The world finally knew their worth. But amid the triumph, the exhaustion of success began to touch the group. Fame is loud, and it doesn't leave much room for silence. Traveling from city to city, performing night after night, the trio lived fast because the industry demanded it. And like many artists of the era, temptation followed them everywhere: parties, substances, pressure, expectations. It was a decade where talent soared and boundaries blurred. For the O'Jays, the victories kept coming. Give the people what they want. Let me make love to you. I love music. Living for the weekend. Hit after hit, album after album, they became pillars of the Philadelphia sound, a sound that shaped modern R&B, soul, and even disco. And William Powell, though quieter than the others, sat at the center of it. His voice wasn't just a layer in the harmony. It was glue. It was architecture. It was the element that made the blend unmistakably theirs. But while the world saw the glow, the shadows behind Powell were growing longer. He was rising higher than he'd ever dreamed. And yet, quietly, something inside him had begun to crack. Success can dazzle from the outside, but on the inside, it asks for a price. As the OJs climbed higher, the pressure wrapped around William Powell like a quiet storm. Late nights blurred into early mornings, and the road became a place where applause hid exhaustion, and hotel rooms hid everything else. Somewhere along the way, heroin, the drug that swept through the music world of the 70s, found him. It didn't arrive loudly. It slipped in like comfort. And comfort can be dangerous. At first, no one noticed anything beyond the long tours and the constant travel. Powell was still smiling, still hitting the high notes that made crowds rise to their feet. But slowly, things began to shift. He missed rehearsals. He arrived late to shows. Some nights, he stepped onto the stage when his eyes were a little too dim, his balance a little too loose. His voice never lost its beauty, but its strength began to waver, the way a candle flickers even while it's still trying to burn bright. Those closest to him understood what was happening, but understanding doesn't always bring answers. The label tried. Eddie and Walter tried. Friends tried. But Powell, honest to the core, told them he had no intention of stopping. "I like it," he said, a simple admission that revealed how deep the struggle had already gone. Addiction wasn't a rumor whispered behind closed doors. It was a shadow walking beside him, and he wasn't ready to let it go. As the months passed, Powell's life became a series of near misses. A dangerous city here. A bad crowd there. The kind of stories every touring musician collects, except Powell's stories carried an edge. Then came the night everything changed, the car accident. Metal twisting, glass breaking, the sudden violence that turns motion into silence. Powell survived, but not without injury. He was taken to the hospital, bruised, shaken, and in pain. What the doctors discovered during treatment was something no one expected. Colon cancer. A diagnosis that hits like a cold wind, even for a man who had walked through years of hard living. He returned from the hospital acting as if everything was fine, wearing the same smile he carried on stage, the one fans adored. But behind that smile, his body was beginning to fail him. Rumors swirled, a robbery, an assault outside an after-hours club, whispered stories of people taking advantage of a weakened man. No one knows which versions were true. What everyone agrees on is this: Powell was becoming too sick to tour. Too weak to keep up. Too fragile to keep pretending the stage could carry him forever. Still, he didn't abandon the music. He stayed in the studio as long as his strength allowed, recording harmonies, blending his voice into the sound he helped create. There's something heartbreaking about that, a man singing through pain, knowing his notes might outlive him. His voice on those final recordings feels softer, almost distant, like it's already fading into the background of time. Eventually, the hardest decision had to be made. The OJs brought in Sammy Strain to replace him on the road. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. Performances were their livelihood, their obligation, their promise to fans. Powell understood. But understanding doesn't soften the sting of being separated from the thing you loved most. As his health worsened, his world became smaller. Studios turned into hospital rooms. Stages turned into quiet nights at home. Fame became something observed from a distance rather than lived. Powell was only in his mid-30s, but sickness ages a man faster than years ever could. His once bright eyes dimmed. His body weakened. His voice, that pure, soaring tenor, slipped lower and lower until it barely rose at all. On May 26, 1977, the music stopped for William Powell. 35 years old. A life that had given the world platinum records, iconic harmonies, and a sound that helped define the Philadelphia soul era, ended before most people even know their place in the world. News of his passing did not dominate headlines. There were no major specials, no national tributes. But those who knew him, Eddie, Walter, musicians, fans who heard him live, felt the loss deeply, as if a piece of the OJ's foundation had quietly crumbled. In the years that followed, another wound surfaced, money owed to Powell's estate. His mother received only a small advance, a fraction of what he had earned, and after her death, the family discovered over $1 million in unpaid royalties. Court filings, disputes, public frustrations, they all revealed the truth too many black artists of that era faced. Powell had given the world his voice, but the world hadn't given him what he deserved. And that's the tragedy inside the tragedy. A brilliant singer gone too soon. A legacy shadowed by neglect. A life that mattered, but was never fully honored. In the years after William Powell's passing, something revealing happened, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet corners of American music history. People remembered the OJs. They remembered the hits, the harmonies, the shows that left audiences breathless. And yet, when Powell's name appeared, it felt like a whisper rather than an echo. In a country that celebrates legends loudly, his legacy slipped into a softer space, known mostly by those who truly listened. Among musicians, however, Powell's influence never faded. Artists and producers in the Philadelphia soul movement often spoke of him as the missing color in the OJ's palette, the tone that made the trio's sound complete. In studios across America, vocal arrangers studied the architecture of those harmonies, finding Powell's tenor weaving through them like a delicate thread that held everything together. To them, his contributions were undeniable. Essential. Irreplaceable. But the broader American audience saw another truth. Powell's story mirrored the struggles of so many black artists of his generation. Brilliant. Hardworking. Underrecognized. And caught in a system that often profited from their gifts more than it protected their future. When news surfaced that over $1 million in royalties had never reached his family, it struck a nerve. It reminded the public of how frequently black musicians, especially those who weren't front and center stars, were shortchanged by contracts, labels, and an industry built on uneven ground. Globally, the world that embraced Philadelphia soul continued to play the records Powell helped create. In Europe, especially, the OJs remained icons, their vinyls spinning in clubs and record shops long after the American charts had moved on. Listeners overseas didn't always know Powell's name, but they knew his sound, that shimmering lift in the harmonies, that brightness that could turn a chorus into something unforgettable. In America, though, his story carries a weight that belongs uniquely to this country, a reminder of how easily a foundational voice can be overlooked, how brilliance can be both celebrated and forgotten at the same time. And how important it is, especially now, to tell the stories of artists who never received the recognition they deserved. Because remembering Powell isn't just about honoring a singer. It's about honoring the truth. There's a moment, when you listen closely to an OJ's record, where the harmony opens like a doorway, and in that doorway, William Powell's voice still waits. Soft, steady, unmistakable. It rises through the years as if refusing to disappear, as if insisting that even a life cut short can leave a mark that outlives the body that carried it. Powell didn't stay long enough to see the world fully honor him. But the music he helped build refuses to let his name go silent. His legacy isn't measured in headlines or magazine covers. It lives in the architecture of sound, the way the trio's harmonies click perfectly into place, the way the Philly soul movement grew into a force that shaped American music. Powell was one of its quiet architects. A man who didn't need to stand in front to be essential. There's a rare beauty in that, a strength found in subtlety, in contribution without demand, in talent that served the whole rather than the self. His story carries a softer lesson, too. Brilliance doesn't always come wrapped in spotlight. Sometimes it's found in the person who shows up to blend, to support, to elevate the room without asking for anything in return. Powell showed us what it means to give your gift completely, even when the world doesn't give everything back. And so the question becomes ours to answer. If a voice shaped the soundtrack of our lives, don't we owe it a place in our memory? Don't we owe it a moment to be seen, finally, in full? Tonight, we honor William Powell, not just as a singer, but as a man whose notes helped carry a generation. A man whose talent deserves its name spoken clearly. A man whose life reminds us how fragile brilliance can be, and how powerful it becomes when we choose not to forget. If this story brought someone to mind, a musician, a memory, a moment, feel free to share it below. These stories live longer when we carry them together. And if you'd like more journeys like this, stories that shine a light on the artists who shaped our world, we'd be grateful to have you with us. Until next time, keep their stories alive.